I am at Eastman's Hatch Hall with Craig Schulman. Thank you so much for being with me today.
My pleasure.
So now you perform in basically every form of singing that you could do. You do opera, you've done musical theater, you've performed with orchestras.
Mm-hmm.
Why have you chosen to do them all? How do you balance?
Actually, it's kind of the other way around. A lot of young performers kind of know what they want to do and follow a particular path to hopefully achieve what it is that they set out to do. I just had this idea that I wanted to be a performer. And so I learned early on that it was my voice that garnered most of my attention and most of the work that I was getting. So after I graduated college, and I had a varied college career, I was a music major at the beginning, I was a theater major, I was a broadcasting major. So I didn't really know exactly what it was that I wanted to do. But in my senior year at Oswego, I discovered opera voice. And I was very I had no context to put that in. I didn't know what it was all about or what I was supposed to do with it. So I just kind of saved it for the practice room, and nobody knew that I had it except for me. And I graduated, and I went home, and I sat around that summer trying to figure out what am I going to do with the rest of my life. And I was engaged to someone at the time, and I thought, well, I really would love to perform, but maybe I should try to get a real job and settle down and get ready to get married. Well, the engagement didn't work out, and one of my childhood buddies said to me, you know, you have been talking about being an actor, a performer, since I've known you in kindergarten. And he said, right now you are not responsible to anyone for anything. So if you don't at least try it, he said, right now you're out of your mind. And that was maybe the best advice that I ever got. Curse you, Danny. So I just started going into New York City. I grew up on Long Island, so I would take the train into New York and I would audition for anything and everything. And my first job was at a little company called the Light Opera of Manhattan, which was a Gilbert and Sullivan and operetta repertory company. So we performed 52 weeks a year. And I got in the ensemble, and they explained to us how we would become members of the ensemble, singing the chorus, and eventually we would move up into secondary roles, and eventually we might even get starring roles in these little Gilbert and Sullivan shows. And so I decided that I would give it 3 or 4 months till the end of the year, good, bad, or indifferent, just to get some experience, you know. Yeah. And what became very clear quickly was that they had the same group of people doing all the leads and all the shows, and all of them had been there for 10 years. So nobody else was going anywhere. So I figured, like I said, I'd just get it on my resume, do it for a few months. And just about the time that I started to think about leaving, one of the principal players got in an argument with the people who ran the theater, and she quit and managed to convince all of her colleagues there that it was time that they left this sheltered company and made their careers out in the big world, you know. So all of a sudden they were scrambling for people, and they knew me, and I had done one act as Frederick in Pirates of Penzance. And so they hired me to do the next production of Pirates. And all of a sudden I became the house tenor. So I became that guy.
You were.
And I was there for exactly 2 years. I did 650 performances.
Wow.
I wound up doing 10 of the 13 Gilbert and Sullivan shows, plus Merry Widow, Student Prince, some other lesser known and deserving of their obscurity, in my opinion, operettas. And then there came a time at the end of that 2 years that they didn't have anything in their season that they could use me for. And so through a fluke, I got my equity card from them. And I got hired into it was a national tour for Columbia Artists, a production of The Merry Widow. So I went out on that tour, and of course this little company got all bent out of shape because I had the temerity to actually get another job with another company, you know. So
work your way up.
Yeah, you know.
Make it to the big leagues.
So that was the end of my association with the Light Opera of Manhattan, or the Lunatic Opera of Manhattan, as I used to call it, Loom. And so I went out for 10 weeks on this tour of The Merry Widow, and I met the woman who would become my wife on that tour. And people were saying to me, you know, you have a beautiful voice, but you have no idea what you're doing with it. And I had a few voice lessons here and there over the years, but I really had no idea what vocal technique was all about. any idea how to make use of it. And so on someone's suggestion, I started studying with a serious voice teacher in New York, and somebody took me to see, I think it was La Traviata at New York City Opera. And I was, oh my God, this is what I want to do with my life. There's singing, there's, the sets, and a great story, and this is it for me. So I started pursuing a career as an opera singer. I did my opera apprenticeship at Chautauqua one summer, many, many years ago. And so I started off in the direction of trying to create a career as an opera singer. And I was starting to get major roles in major regional companies. I played Rodolfo in La Boheme. Actually, that was my first professional opera job at the Oswego Opera Theater. But I went on to do La Traviata, Manon, did Cavaradossi and Tosca, Pinkerton and Madame Butterfly. I made my debut as Don Jose and Carmen at Cincinnati Opera. That's a very major house. And like that. So for a number of years, that's what I was pursuing. And in 1987, I was doing a show called The Tender Land at the Long Wharf Theater in New Haven. And there was a guy we had sort of two directors. This guy was a co-director and choreographer. And he said, I really like your acting. He said, you should be doing musical theater. And he introduced me to his agent, and I went and met with her, and she came up and saw me in the show. And she said, they're casting Les Miserables, the national tour, and Phantom is coming in next year. And she said, with your background, I can't imagine that there isn't something, for you in one of those. Yeah. So I said, I don't know anything about musical theater, so if you want to submit me and, see what happens.
Oh, so that came later.
Right, oh yeah. Let's see. I was working sort of part-time professionally until I got into Les Miserables for almost 10 years. I worked, here and there, and then temping, and I never waited tables like so many of my colleagues have. But
now you were in Les Miserables.
Les Miserables.
Les Miserables, and you've done almost 2,000 shows. Yeah, more than 2,000. Yeah. How do you go out every single night and play the same character and make it convincing every time?
There's a lot of answers to that. First of all, I didn't do them all consecutively. I was in the show over a period of 10 years.
Yeah, of course.
It's like everything that I ever wanted to do, was that show. It's a musical theater piece, but it's kind of an opera. In fact, they spoke to us when the first day of rehearsal for the national tour was basically a big meeting, and the producers and the directors talked about the fact that they recognized that it was really an opera, but if they used the word opera, they were afraid that their audience would not appreciate it for the piece of musical theater that it is. And so there was never any mention of, Les Mis, the opera. It became known as the musical sensation, which really doesn't mean a whole lot. But so I was offered ensemble, and then understudy for Valjean. And I started going on, actually the first time I went on, a month to the day after we opened, I had 4 rehearsals on stage.
Oh, wow.
Didn't even have my costumes, my wigs yet. So it was pretty exciting. In fact, I was so frightened that very first performance, I was nauseous. And I was seriously considering going in the bathroom in the dressing room and sticking my finger down my throat just to get it over with. I was so scared. It went by like that. And when it was over, it was like I couldn't even remember doing it.
Yeah, it was probably one of the best feelings.
So intense, yeah. But it was a great night, apparently. My colleagues certainly were laudatory in their comments. And I always treated it as a work in progress, so that I would always look for new things. I wouldn't arbitrarily just throw new things in. But different things would happen. Over the years, I worked with different casts of people. So everybody brings their own interpretation of whatever role it is, their own energy, So I was always very open to that. Things would happen during a performance that might trigger a little inspiration. Little things that probably wouldn't mean anything to anybody else, but would help me come up with new things. For instance, one time, have you seen Les Mis?
No, I have not.
Oh, well, you're missing out. At the end of the show, the original company the production was on a turntable. And so it was very cinematic in its scope, and the turntable would rotate. Rather than a curtain coming in and going out between each scene, the set, and there was just some furniture pieces really, that would get set upstage in the dark, and when a scene was over, the whole thing would rotate. So if there were other people in the next scene, they might already be on the set. So it's kind of cinematic in that sense. And so right before the finale in Act 2, Valjean is alone in his house. I was in Singapore, actually. That's where I met Gary, who's singing with me this weekend, doing the play, the little French play, as we called it. And Valjean would be at the table, and it was a wooden table with a little simple crucifix and 2 candles. And he's sitting at the table, kneeling on the floor, just praying as it rotates in front of the audience. And in Singapore, being tropical, almost every afternoon there was a thunderstorm. And one day during the matinee, as I was starting to do that scene, there was a huge peal of thunder. And I just had this flash of, if I was shooting the movie, ironically they are shooting the movie, I pictured a thunderstorm in Paris, and the rain is just sheeting down, and so the camera is looking down this street, and suddenly the camera turns, and there's a little window, a little glass window, with window panes, and the camera moves in, and the window opens, and there's Valjean at the table praying alone in his little home. And that means absolutely nothing to anyone else. It was all in my head, but it was just a little something, and so things would happen. I mean, once in a while we'd have a mechanical problem with the set, something didn't come in or refused to go out, or,
Keeps you on your feet.
Exactly. And another thing is that I have always considered it a privilege to get paid for performing. And so I always felt that anytime I was on stage, I have to give it 110%. And you're not always capable of giving the same performance as other times, but I always make the effort.
Yeah, totally.
And one of the things that I discovered is that as long as I was committed, that really to the performance, it wasn't up to me to decide, oh, tonight I wasn't so good, or another, because there were nights that I thought, I didn't feel well, or I was really tired, and I didn't feel that I had reached the same intensity or the same level of performance that I might have another time. And I began to realize that as long as I was completely committed, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
So
just enjoy the performance.
that's the long answer about how do you keep it fresh.
Now, as well as performing, you also teach, correct? And you do master classes?
I have been teaching master classes, sort of musical theater audition master class.
Why is it important to you to teach as well as perform?
I remember when I was a young performer, observing more experienced performers and learning from them. And I know how important theater was to me personally and to my development as a human being, as a person. I was very shy as a child. So it's kind of amazing, actually, that I wound up doing what I'm doing. Because when I started out in high school, I remember just like shaking. I was so nervous to in fact, I couldn't even sing Happy Birthday in front of my parents. That's how shy I was. And yet, there I was, 9th grade, couldn't wait to get to high school so I could do the musical.
Yeah.
And so I know how important it's been to just my life, and how important it is for young people, whether they're teenagers or even younger or college students. And I've had a very extraordinary career. I'm not a big star, but I've had a lot of really interesting and varied experiences, and I think it's important to be able to share that with them. I have a passion for what I do, and I like to try to instill that in my students. I have a small voice teaching practice that I have begun a little less than a year ago, so I have a number of students. I also was hired last September. I'm actually a college professor, I'll have you know, adjunct professor of acting at Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut. So I'm really enjoying that, because that's the first time I've been in a real, what do you call it? Like a structured academic environment. Yes, had to come up with a syllabus. I had to come up with something to teach every class. But I really, really like it.
Now, I read your column on creating your CD, and that seemed like a crazy journey. And these two guys, Jeff and Jason, just came up to you and basically said, here's the money and we want to help you.
In essence, yeah, that's really what happened. I was doing Jekyll and Hyde. They had seen me do Phantom in Cleveland, I believe, when I was on the tour. So they were fans, and they had moved to New York, and I was in Jekyll and Hyde for a period of time. And they just came and introduced themselves to me at the stage door. And we started chatting, and we met numerous times, and they said, hey, we have something we want to talk to you about. Could we take you to lunch? And how come you don't have a CD? And I said, well, it costs a lot of money to do a CD. It's certainly the way I would like to do it, because by then I had this concert career, and if I'm going to sell CDs at a concert, then I felt I need to give the audience who's buying my CD a taste of what it is that they've just heard. So a lot of my colleagues have done their CDs with piano, bass, and drums, small combo accompaniment. And to take nothing away from them and the quality of what they all have done, but I just felt like it doesn't do the Broadway music justice. It kind of, a lot of times it just sounds like somebody's club act, as opposed to really giving that full symphonic sound.
Yeah.
And so I waited and waited until I could get myself in a situation, and I said, well, this is what I really want to do, and it costs a lot of money, and it wound up actually costing about twice what I thought it was going to cost. But some people stepped up, and Jeff and Jason and I each put in a third. And when I needed more money, somebody else came up with some money, and just as a gift, because they believed in me. And so, yeah.
What is some advice that you could give to a young musician or someone who is about to go and make their first CD?
Make sure that you have enough money. I hired this guy as a producer. He had won several Grammys for classical recordings, and he had done some cast recordings as well. And so initially I was looking at finding a symphony orchestra. And then I realized, well, if I pick one symphony orchestra, all the other ones are going to get pissed at me. And it was going to cost probably in the neighborhood of, by the time everything was said and done, about $30,000. And my producer said to me, well, if you want to take it out of the U.S. symphony realm, and you would like to do a state-of-the-art first-class recording, he said, for about $5,000 more, let's go to Abbey Road Studios, and we'll hire the Philharmonia Orchestra of London, and many of those players also play in the London Philharmonic. And so it actually costs a lot more than $5,000, but I decided to go for it. So there's no competition, and that doesn't really answer your question. It's a big job. It's a business kind of thing. So I actually had to create, because I had investors and I have to report to them and I have to pay them out of the proceeds of my sales, I created a little label called Broadway Gems Records, and inspired by the Screen Gems. I don't know if you've ever seen, but years ago there was some kind of organization that did movies, and it was, Screen Gems Presents. So it was Broadway Gems. I designed a logo, put up a website, the whole thing, and I do the bookkeeping badly and slowly, but so now it's gotten a lot easier, I think. It's a lot easier too if you have your own music, if you create your own music, you don't have to worry about getting permission to use somebody's stuff and paying royalties. And so the way I went about it, it was quite an expensive process. Probably wound up costing me about $80,000. But I hired a 43-piece orchestra.
And the CD came out.
It came out
how
great.
You wanted it.
Exactly. So, look at it as a business.
And my last question is, what is the best piece of advice that you can give for young performers and musicians who are looking to get into this career?
I would say get as much experience doing everything you can in theater, number one. Number two, I think you have to want the career, not for the applause, but for what you can bring to it, what you can give the audience, and when you can do that, then you get the satisfaction. My satisfaction comes from when people come up to me after a show and they'll say, oh my God, you inspired me. I got many, many letters over the years from people who saw Les Mis and Phantom and how, inspiring my performance was. Often people would say to me, I'd seen Les Mis, 6 times, and then I saw you in it, and it was on a whole different level. It became a different kind of show. And to me, that's the greatest praise that I could get.
Yeah.
Not that people were applauding my performance, but that they were getting what I was doing. And I brought that to my concert performance. I try to create each song sort of its own context. I don't work in costume with makeup or anything like that, but just with my physicality and what I can do with changing my voice a little bit and characterization. My goal is to make the audience feel like if they close their eyes, they would think they were in the theater watching, you know, a national tour or a Broadway production of whatever show the song is from. And I think that I'm still doing this 20 years later, that I've been pretty successful at it.
Great. Well, Craig, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Kelly.